All right. What's up, everybody? How's it going? I am here with my guest, Stan, who's been on the channel, I think, a couple times before. And today we're going to be talking about Newcomb's problem. And I'll probably have a few things to say, but basically, you should check out Stan's blog. I already forgot the name of it. What is it called? Philosophy Stan over on
Yeah.
Substack. And there's a blog. I should have put a link in the description. I will after the video, called Min-Maxing Newcomb's Paradox. So you could check out the associated blog post over there. Give Stan a subscribe over there. I love the articles. They're way short. They're not the like 3,000 page articles that I write on there. So they're actually digestible in fun chunks, and they're just a lot of fun to read. He has a very unique style. I absolutely love it. I'm always telling like my students, like, you don't have to write in this homogenous, almost like corporate academies when you're writing.
Yeah.
You can make it engaging, you know? So check out his blog. Anyway, Stan, introduce yourself. And I was talking up your blog, so you could say a bit about that too if you want.
Cool. Yeah. So I'm a philosophy stan, but I'm not a philosopher. I don't know. I'm not involved in philosophy in any official capacity. I'm a game designer, director. That's my job. But I love philosophy, and there's a lot of interface between strategic thinking and how people react to different situations, how to set things up so that certain things result in like human behavior and our human condition and how that reacts to different situations. So there's a lot of like cross-pollination there, and that's why I remain a very passionate person when it comes to philosophy, and I like writing about it and thinking about it and all that kind of stuff. And yeah, this Substack is the best way to just kind of see my latest stuff on things, my latest views on things.
Yeah, and I already included a link in the description. I updated it, and I'm going to throw it in here, and I'll pin it so that everybody can go check it out. But yeah, the video game stuff, we actually started a few minutes late because I got all excited as like I saw the Duke Nukem stuff in the background, and then I just went,
Yeah.
I love games. Games for me are, life is tough, a lot of stress, a lot of rough stuff going on for me. Games are this escape valve I could get into where all that pressure, like it feels like gravity, like I'm in Dragon Ball Z and I'm like Goku training in that gravity chamber. Like that's life. The moment I get into a game and I get immersed, it's all gone. And that pressure valve release, it's better than almost anything I could imagine. It's like, I don't even know how to describe it. So games matter a lot to me. And I really like the intersection of philosophy and games. And we're going to have to talk about that at some point. I mean, did we talk about Disco Elysium?
No, I don't think so.
Oh my God. Those are my favorite things I've played in the past like 15 years. It's good. And Planescape Torment, like, that is such a philosophy. There's so much cool stuff there. But today we're talking about Newcomb's problem. So instead of me rambling, why don't we get into it? Why don't you tell us about Newcomb's problem? We'll talk about your article and the points that you want to make about Newcomb's problem.
Okay, yeah. So the thing that really like triggered all of this for me was when I was looking at the Phil Papers survey and looking at the results, that I was like, oh yeah, good job, philosophers. I agree with those. And then others are like, what are you thinking? Why is there a majority on this other position? And on Newcomb's problem, it's a fork in the road. You can decide what decision you want to make in the problem. And the decision that I think is not the thing you should do actually edged out the other position among the hundreds of philosophers surveyed. And that kind of stuff motivates me, and I decided to like dive head first into this problem. And I had been talking with people about it for a couple decades now, and there's a lot of different for me, I like studying how those discussions evolve, because they tell you maybe there's a problem with the thought experiment, because everybody seems to be gravitating towards certain like side conversations or certain interpretations that aren't necessarily the thing at the headwaters. And so that's what drove kind of the interest in doing the article, though. So the Newcomb's problem is where you have you have two boxes. One box, you can see how this has $1,000 in it. The second box is opaque, and it's up to you whether you want to take one box, the opaque box, whatever contents are in the opaque box, or whether you want to take both boxes. Now, the contents of the opaque box are determined by a predictor who long ago made a prediction about whether or not you would take one box, the opaque one, or both boxes, the opaque one plus the $1,000 one. And if he predicted that you would take both, if he predicted greed, right, then he puts $0 in the opaque box. If, however, he predicted frugality or whatever, just the one box and you leave the 1,000, if he predicted you would do that, then he puts $1 million in the box, almost like a reward for holding yourself back or whatnot. Now, the problem is set up in a fuzzy way. It does not say that it's a perfect predictor. It says that it's a really, really good predictor. So far, completely perfect track record, just amazing wizardly-like prediction faculties, but maybe could err. And the first issue with that is that that's a huge gap of ambiguity. It seems like, oh, well, it's the difference between 100% and 99.99999. Well, it turns out that tiniest little gap can make a massive difference in how the problem is even interpreted by people. And it means that there are many Newcombs problems. We could frame it that way. We could say, actually, there are like zillions of Newcombs problems, depending on how those sentences are interpreted. And the way it was originally written is like trying to hand wave it like, okay, it's not perfect, but it's mostly perfect. Okay, moving on. It's like, no, you can't move on, because right there is already a splayed interpretation of the possible problems that are going on. I say that, but let's return back to the problem. Now, you take the one box, you get $1 million. That seems pretty good, right? The issue is that there's a principle, a game theoretic principle called the dominance principle. The dominance principle says you're playing a game, there's decisions before you, a menu of decisions, 10 decisions, 20, 2, whatever. And if one of those decisions that you make is at least as good as every other one you could make, if not better, then that decision dominates the others. And it is the rational one to make, according to the dominance principle. And so this puts you in a very peculiar situation, because if you say that the contents under the opaque box are set, then suddenly the dominance principle says, regardless of what's under the opaque box, you should take both. Because whether you take just one or whether you take both, you'll get the extra $1,000. So per this principle, if you say, okay, let's follow it through. Let's say the box is empty. Should you take one box or both? Well, you should take both, because if you take one, you'll get 0. And if you take both, you'll get 1,000. If, on the other hand, the opaque box has $1 million in it, again, you should take both, because you'll get the $1 million and you'll get the 1,000 instead of just $1 million. So dominance principle stomps in and says it's rational to take both boxes. And I'll stop there. So that's the puzzle, right? So we have the setup, the predictor, and we have the dominance principle suggesting that 2 boxes might be the right call.
Yeah. So my issue with Newcomb's problem, and I've had some private discussions about this, I haven't discussed it too much publicly, is that it always looked to me, well, not always. The more I thought about it, the more I started to suspect, I think that there might be some underlying ambiguities in the setup, and that what I found is that if I said, oh, but if I did this, then could this happen, or would this happen? And then different people would give me different answers. They would start. It's almost like they were. It was like confabulate. The responses that they would give would be partially confabulatory, and some of them would take it in one direction, some would take it in another. And so that looked to me immediately like, oh, there's ambiguities here. And it looked like once you resolve those ambiguities, whatever answer, there's like a trivial response. Like if my goal is just to get as much money as possible, and someone says, look, if I'm stipulating, so I did have someone say this, I'm stipulating that if you say to me that you would 2-box, there will be no money in the box. So I'm like, okay, so that
yeah.
I froze up again. At that point, okay, well then I'm not going to 2-box, because you're telling me I can either get $1 million or I could get $1,000. Why would I choose the one where I get less money? If so, at that point you might as well just say, hey, would you want $1 million or $1,000? I'll take the $1 million. So then I want to know, like, are you telling me the outcomes of my decisions in advance? Because if that's the case, now the response is going to be pretty straightforward. But if that's not being explicitly stipulated and there's wiggle room, now we have to haggle over the scenario.
Right.
And I wouldn't have thought that a typical thought experiment is one where I have to haggle with the person about it. If I give someone like a Monty Hole scenario, there's like a mathematically demonstrable fact about the outcomes of my decisions. If I give someone a trolley problem scenario, there's not that. There's not a mathematically precise outcome, but like I know what happens if I make one decision or another because that's part of the stipulation that's built into the setup. But Newcomb's problem seems a little wobbly, and I have concerns about. You said there's multiple Newcomb's problems. What is actually going on in these scenarios? Like, why is it an almost perfect predictor? Why not just say it's a perfect predictor? Something funny about that. But another thing that always concerned me, and I'll ask you what you think about this. I don't know if there's like a literature on this that I haven't read, or maybe I read it and I have some vague memory of it. What if I tell you this? Like we have this version of the predictor, right? So it's an iteration of the Newcomb's problem where it predicts either you're going to 2 box or you're going to 1 box, and then 1 hour later, after you get your prize, you're going to stand up, recite the Gettysburg Address, do a dance, and sit down and then eat a ham sandwich or something. Okay, so if I say I'm going to 1 box, like, okay, so now I 1 box, I get the $1 million, I leave the room. What happens? Like, do I no longer have control over what happens an hour from now? There seems to be something funny about that because at that point, it doesn't just seem like it was really good at predicting what I was going to do. It seems like we're creating a scenario where there's like a fatalistic element to its predictive abilities. There is no way to avoid the prediction. And that doesn't seem to me to modify standard descriptions of its predictive powers. It's just making them like prospective and not just retrospective. But if that's the case, I don't see a practical difference between it making a prediction and it simply controlling what I do. And something about that seems weird.
And I'll tell you kind of a thought experiment that I came up with, thinking about this meeting that we would have today, and it goes into this. And there's like accessibility stuff. So imagine you have a wizard pal who is like fantastic at predicting the future. Let's just say perfect predictor. And he goes, "Oh, have you decided where you're going to go on vacation yet this weekend?" And you're like, "I haven't decided yet." And he was like, "Oh, okay, well, I know what you're going to decide. And in fact, if you swing by my house tomorrow, I have a gift for you." So tomorrow you come by his house and he gives you a manila envelope. And he says, "Okay, this envelope has a painting I made of the place that you're going to go. And I painted it and it's a gift for you, but don't open it until you get to your destination." And you're like, "Oh, okay." So you take the envelope, you pack, you're waffling on where you're going to go. Finally, you make the decision on where you're going to go and you go to the beach or something. You get to the beach, you open the envelope, you open it up. It's a painting of the beach because your friend's a wizard and he's a perfect predictor or whatnot. Okay, now you can, whichever decision you make, it will have been the case that the painting matches your destination, given stipulating the perfect predictor. Now, here's where the weird stuff comes in. What if I break his rule and I want to open the envelope early, and then I want to make a different decision than whatever he painted? Okay, so I open it up early. What's in there, right? If given he's a perfect predictor. Now, here's the thing. He has to know all of that stuff. He has to know that I'm going to open up the thing early. He has to know that I'm not going to go to that place. Therefore, he can't make the promise that the painting is going to match. That's all that means. So if like the situation becomes impossible because certain things like, predicting I'm going to dance around the room and do all sorts of wacky stuff, that is fatalistically granted by the thought experiment, but it's set against the plausible accessibility of those actions. Like, it doesn't matter if you're a perfect prophet, you can't predict stuff that's not going to happen. And you can stipulate chains of events where it's like, oh, okay, they're going to make this perfect prediction, but now the prediction is going to be false. It's like, that's just a contradiction in the setup. And that helps us kind of untangle why it might feel fatalistic when a thought experiment just kind of like imposes this very implausible result on you. But it also helps us more like gut feel what's going on here. Even if you have a perfect predictor, what it means is that the contents of the manila envelope or the second box are in flux. They're in modal flux. Once they're opened, it will have been the case that the contents are this or that, but until that point, they should be treated as open. And thus the dominance principle can't even be run, because you can't say if this, then this, if this, then this. Now hold on. It turns out that the decision that you make has a retromodal word I made up because I hate saying retrocausal. It's not as if time travel is true, but a retromodal tether back to this prediction and the action that the predictor took. And that kind of just helps us see why this feels sci-fi, but it isn't literally sci-fi, just by running some of these other more less problematic or more accessible versions of the thought experiment.
Yeah. So, when you bring up things like that, like there's these funky elements, there's weird elements, there's seemingly science fiction elements, there's retromodal stuff happening. This can often cause some people to get off the train right away. And I don't want people to do that, because I want people to be able to respond to questions. And I don't think it's pointless to ask questions like, what if we lived in a world where we had indefinite life extension, or cryogenics worked, or like there were a bunch of AIs that could, like, I don't have a problem with hypothetical questions. I don't have a problem with counterfactual questions. And I don't have a problem with any of this stuff in principle. The problem for me is not the weird elements. The problem is that when I'm expected to give a definitive answer to a question that is presented as if there is a clean setup that's clear and unambiguous between option A and option B, when in fact it is often depicted or framed or articulated in ways where the question itself has sort of it's like almost like Schrodinger's question, where if I answer one way, you're going to say this. If I answer another way, you're going to say that. Or there are ambiguities where it's not clear to me how to resolve the ambiguity unless you stipulate. And then if you stipulate, then my answer is going to be A if you stipulate one way, or it's going to be B if you stipulate the other way. But then that would just render the whole thing kind of trivial and uninteresting. And so what makes it such an ongoing matter of contention is that people are actually playing with ambiguities as if they weren't ambiguities, as if there were something decisive. And actually what they're playing with is constantly vacillating, almost like this linguistic and conceptual Necker cube in their minds. And they're like, wow, when you look at it this way, the cube is in the front. Oh no, if you look at that way, you're seeing it from the top. No, you're seeing it from the bottom. No, just imagine a group of people. Like, how silly would philosophers look if they sat around with Necker cubes going, so is it on the bottom? No, look, it's on the top. Squint this way. Oh, whoa, it is on the top. And then you see the other one. Oh, but I just squinted it and now it's on the bottom again. Oh my gosh. Like everyone would laugh at that and go, these people are ridiculous. This is a complete waste of time. And so philosophers set up verbal Necker cubes, and then everyone jumps around going, it's the top, it's the bottom, it's the top, it's the bottom, as if there's a serious puzzle here. And it's just like, nah, this is just like there are optical illusions, there are linguistic and conceptual illusions. And, once you disentangle what they are, the problem stops being a problem. We don't have a Newcomb's problem. We have a Newcomb's
Yes, and as soon as it stops being a problem, you stop talking about it, right? And then there's no more conversation. And the party only continues among the folks who are choosing to keep going with it. So like one of the papers I read on this stuff is by Peter Slezak, and he's a zero boxer, he says, because he doesn't agree with the setup. He thinks that there's retrocausal nonsense happening within the setup, and so that's something that he rejects for whatever reason. And as a result, it's like, okay, you can do that. You can just bail out of the situation. And often, like, I like to say, that's usually what you should do probably with a lot of these. Like, oh, there's ambiguity in the setup. Done, right? Or, okay, let's narrow down the forks that you can take. If fork one, you accept prediction and common causality, then it plays out like this. If you don't, then you just reject the story. You're a story rejector, and then you're done. Either way, the story ends, right? But then you stop talking about it. The maze can't have exits, the discursive maze. The discursive maze must loop you back. You think you're leaving. Oops, you're just in another place. And then eventually it has to return you to where you started. And you can visualize it like 3 linguistic Necker cubes joined by apparent exits that people take, but actually just linked to new ambiguities and new confusions to paddle around with. And then it comes right back to the beginning. And we see this with the free will and compatibilism debate as well. I mean, I think it's no accident that the free will stuff comes up in Newcomb's problem. But if you're just talking free will, what it means, what it implies, whether it's important for moral responsibility, all that kind of stuff, there are oscillating discursive patterns that you notice after you've been in these for 25 years and watching all sorts of people go through them, and you can see the crowd move from dispute to dispute. They think they have an exit, but now they're just talking about this thing, and then now it's time to rewash. The spin cycle goes around and around and again, and that's the party. That's the music, right? And the only way you can leave, of course, that's one solution, but that doesn't really stop the party. And so the challenge, the meta challenge, is like, how can we make a new party? A party that talks about these things and why they trap people. Can we get interested and excited in those common patterns? Can we dissect these things so we all realize what's going on? And can we have fun with it in those terms? That's kind of the what's before us as quiet-minded folk.
Yeah. Can you there's lots of stuff I could say about that, but I'm actually just really interested in you walking us through what you end up talking about in the blog, if you're able to do that. If someone asked me about a blog, even if I wrote it 2 weeks ago, I don't know what I wrote. But you have this, I like the structure because you have these foibles that you bring up. Could you maybe walk us through those and show what the specific problems are in the Newcombs problem case?
Yeah, so we want to be able to trust smart and sensible people. If philosophy has a problem, it's that we trust those folks too much. We give them too much credit, and we don't understand that there are common foibles to everybody. Saying smartest person is like saying fastest snail. Even the smartest person has a bunch of foibles affecting them, many cognitive biases. And sometimes the more pro you get, or the more expert you get in a certain field, the more you're prone to certain kinds of foibles that even regular people don't fall into. So you can't trust anyone, really, not blindly. You have to be able to critique this stuff. And once you notice these things, you can identify some of the foibles at play. And then I say that, and a thought experiment is foibled if it trolls people's foibles, if it has stuff in it that like messes with people's heads according to those common foibles that we have. So the first one is that we are susceptible to named principles and citation, third-person citation. Like if a paper is going along and trying to argue for something, and then it's like, oh, the principle of phenomenal conservatism, right? Or like the geez, I forgot the name of it, but the opposite of brutes, the thing that rules out brutes. For some reason, my brain just emptied.
I don't know it.
The everything has to have a reason.
Principle of sufficient reason?
Yeah. Principle of sufficient reason. So I deal with that all the time. I don't know why I went brain dead, but these principles can be invoked, and then they're treated as premises, and then they're treated as premises that support certain conclusions. Now, just because they are a principle and they sound good doesn't mean that they are true under all circumstances and contexts. And the dominance principle is one of those. And so the example I give in the article is I just make up a new principle called the overpower principle. And the overpower principle says whenever you're given one of these economic dilemmas where there's like 3 boxes versus 2 boxes, or you have 2 doors and there's different numbers of boxes behind them, the overpower principle says take the most boxes. And whether you don't know if they're full or empty or whatever, just take the most boxes. That's the overpower principle. And whichever door gives you the most boxes overpowers the other one and says that this one is rational. It's defining rationality in this context. Now, if the overpower principle is just cited and maybe not described perfectly, or it's just kind of invoked or whatever, a common foible is to just kind of assume that this is a well regarded and helpful and meaningful and, whatever. Plus it has this name, right? Overpowers and whatever. So then you look in this situation where it's like, well, what if the 3 boxes are empty and the 2 boxes are full of money? Well, then the overpower principle is bad, right? We shouldn't follow it. But then if you have this framing like, well, it's a principle and that's what rationality means. So I'm sorry, you're going to end up with no money instead of lots of money, but at least you're being rational. And this seems absurd. And yet there are articles, there are papers written about Newcomb's paradox. One of them is called like, if you're so smart, why aren't you rich? Or something to that effect. Maybe that's a Batman episode with the Riddler. Why ain't you rich? I think is the name of the episode. But it starts to explore this, and it's like, well, yeah, if you're one boxer, you'll get more money, but that's not rational. But maybe the answer is you have to be irrational. You have to just not be rational, and then you'll win the game or whatever expected value. And I'm sitting there like, oh my gosh, you don't have to define a rationality according to this stupid principle that doesn't work in this situation. And that's the reality of it. Like the dominance principle is dumb in this situation because it expects some fixed antecedent, which is not how you should think of it. So the next foible is that we have trouble thinking about obscured things as unfixed, right? And so the example I often use is you put a coin in a cup, you shake it around, you slam it on the table, it's obscured to you. It's either heads or tails, right? You could say it's possibly heads and possibly tails. But then part of us inside says, well, wait, it's not possibly heads and possibly tails. I heard it fall. It's one or the other. How could it both be possible, right? We struggle with that. And what we're dealing with is 2 different like modal framings for what is going on under the cup. The safest one in my view is doxastic or epistemic modality, where you say, yeah, it's per my vantage point, per what I can see, neither is ruled out, and therefore both are possible, because possible means not ruled out per blah. Now, if I have my buddy who goes under the table and it's a glass table, and he sees that the coin has fallen whatever way he sees, per his vantage point, just heads is possible because tails is ruled out, because he can see that it didn't land that way. And if he relays that information to me, then now I have his shared modal vantage. So now for me, it is no longer possible to be both. Now it's just possible to be one because the other is ruled out. But what if I don't trust my friend? Or what if I think my friend is kind of doofy and he might be looking at the face toward the bottom, not understanding that the face should be the up face, right? And if I doubt what he might be meaning by his interpretation, now it's back into modal obscurity and we're back to possibly heads and possibly tails. We don't typically think that way. Philosophers often use the word possible as if it's not indexed to anything. It's not per anything. It's just possible. And this causes a bunch of havoc, bunch of chaos, bunch of confusion. But it's very common foible among even very smart and sensible people. And then the final foible is the one we've already kind of alluded to, which is implausible thought experiments, just like contrived situations that, oh, their heart's in the right place. They're trying to set it up carefully in order to get at this exact thing they're trying to get at. And yet the situation is so wacky that it creates varieties of interpretations in normal people, because normal people are like, huh, what? Oh, I guess he means this. Oh, I'm going to interpret that this way. And they're not even doing it unconsciously. But at the end of the day, you have a million versions of the experiment, depending on how it was interpreted. So those are the 3 big ones. And I called Newcomb's paradox a foible fest because it's all of those. It's all of those in one big wad. And so it's no surprise that it's caused such chatter for decades.
Yeah, the first one of these is one that I think generalizes. I mean, all of these come up in a lot of places, but this first foible, like the labeling stuff, it just makes me think of all of these instances that fall outside the scope of this, of non-instrumental conceptions of rationality, where you can be sort of threatened by being told, but if you do that, that would be irrational. And I had to go dig up, this quote. I'm always trying to find this quote, and then I always lose it. from David Lewis. I don't know if you've seen this quote. I don't know if it's also probably not going to put the whole thing on the screen. Yeah, it's only got part of it at a time. So here's the quote. Why care about and I promise this is relevant. Why care about objective value or ethical reality? The sanction is that if you do not, your inner states will fail to deserve folk theoretical names, not a threat that will strike terror into the heart of the wicked. But whoever thought that philosophy could replace the hangman? And so what he's getting at here is that if all that something amounts to is some folk theoretic term or label like good, bad, moral, immoral, or we could say rational or irrational, is that your way of thinking, your reasoning processes, the position that you take fails to align with that label, why would you care about that? Like, why would that matter to you? And so, if someone comes along and says you got to use the overpower principle or your, quote unquote, irrational, okay, so why would that be a threat to me? I mean, okay, then I'm irrational in that respect. Who cares? But philosophers get a lot of traction out of basically threatening people with labels. Oh, well, then you don't think that's real. You don't think that's actual. You don't think that's whatever it is.
Yeah, it happens all the time because you can replace the hangman with words, with rhetoric.
You can. Yeah, and so it's absolutely everywhere. And what's remarkable about this is philosophers like not appreciating when they do this. But what's interesting about a lot of this is that a lot of these these foibles get entangled with one another. So one of the things that I've been pondering, and Newcomb's problem is of interest to me because I started to see the connections is, I push this normative entanglement thing a lot. And so a lot of this relies on, a philosopher, the prototypical exchange I use is someone says, oh, so you don't think it's objectively wrong to torture babies just for fun, you anti-realist?
Right.
And so if the person says yes, then they're yes, I do think it's objectively wrong. They'll go, aha, so you're a realist. But if they say no, so do you think it's objectively wrong to torture babies for fun? No. The person sounds like an evil maniac. And so the way that you could see this is you could just imagine what would happen if I was walking down the street and, I run into somebody in the street. I'm like, hey, do you think it's objectively wrong to torture people for fun? And they're like, no. That I don't want that person near me. They might be okay with torture. But there's also a philosophical context where if I was at an academic conference and someone says, oh yeah, I'm an anti-realist. And I'm like, okay, so you don't think it's objectively wrong to torture people for fun? And they're like, no. I wouldn't immediately go, oh no, this person's dangerous, because the social context I'm in is one in which they're just confirming their philosophical stance. It wouldn't have any bearing on their practical behavior or their attitudes. And so you could see that there's these, like, the pragmatic implications of what a person is committed to or what it tells you about a person varies based on the social context in an otherwise like verbally identical question. It's exact same question, exact same response. In one context, I'm terrified of the person, they're dangerous and scary. And in the other, they just have a particular philosophical position. But philosophers, oh, sorry.
I'm agnostic on the question of behavioral determinism, but if you want evidence of it, just watch what moral realists say as their like killer move. And it's always this one move of normative entanglement, where that they use like stipulative words like truly or actually or genuinely or sincerely. They attach it to this kind of norm that they're trying to insist is stance independently true, and then they throw it at you, right? But never in my life. So you always see that repeatedly over and over. It's so tired. I'm exhausted by it. You see it all the time. At the same time, I've never seen them use that for something that didn't align with our strongly held and broadly felt cares and concerns, right? I've never seen them run that trick using something that isn't a powerful stance dependent position. Seems like that's what it is, right? Like I care and I'm concerned about babies, about puppies. Like, if we're not crazy maniacs, we all are. And so once those are given, the rest of the discussion is a strategic discussion about what to do. You don't kick them per what we care about, right? But if it's suddenly something that's a little more nebulous, insects getting killed by the grill of your car, driving along. Suddenly it's a little, oh yeah, well, that's not an objective question, I guess. I mean, I don't know. Oh, it's because the stances are no longer given and broad and strongly felt. And suddenly the pure objectivity disappeared. Oh, is that interesting? That one goes away and the other goes away. But yeah, it's all the tactic is just very common. And it's kind of like oh, here I'm going to throw this in their face and then the audience will clap. It's a claptrap kind of move. But it in every case, it's either ignorant or disingenuous.
Yeah, but what's interesting about it is that generalizes outside of that particular context. And a friend of mine I was talking with about this. They use this terminology, that there would be the narrow use of a term. So I could use a term and I could say, look, by this term I mean this specific thing for the purposes of how I'm using it here. And so there I'm like circumscribing its meaning. But then that same term, and this has to do with your second foible, because of terms are polysemous, everyone associates that term with various connotations and various other usages. And so someone can draw on those other associations to say, well, like take rational is exactly the kind of one. A rational person. Like, what's a rational person? It's a person whose actions are fairly predictable. You understand why their actions align with their motivations. That's a rational person up to a point. And then you might also think like you might also think on intersubjective grounds that their motives aren't what you would consider too weird for the kinds of people you're used to.
Right.
So if I found a person that just said, look, I've been using this example lately. All matter in the universe must be turned into peanut butter. Everything must be peanut butter. And they were like a peanut butter alchemist and they just wanted everything to be peanut butter. I actually would be somewhat sympathetic to that because I love peanut butter. But like that's not a rational person. And you also wouldn't think a person's rational if they were just like running in circle screaming. So like we have all these associations. We know what an irrational person is. They're a person that has weird values. They do weird stuff. They act in ways that aren't aligned with what their intended motives are. Or their motives are too different from the motives we're familiar with. So you take all that. Okay. So then with the overpower principle, and this is just it's just a punching bag for all the other sorts of rational principles that are disconnected from our values. You could then foist that on someone and say, but if you don't subscribe, I've stipulated that following my principle is the rational thing. So if you don't do it, you're irrational. Okay, but all like on pure deductive stipulative grounds that commits one to is saying, I don't follow your principle. There's nothing gained by saying you're irrational if you don't follow the principle, because to be irrational just is to not follow the principle. So I can make any principle. I'm stipulating that by rational, it means you give me all your money. Oh, give me all your money. You're not? Oh, then you're irrational. Oh, look how irrational you are. But what that does is, to an audience that's not being attentive, it now sounds like I'm saying you're an insane person with weird motives that's running around in circles screaming and trying to turn everything into peanut butter. So look at that. So I could then leverage that term rational to say, look, you better agree with me or you want to turn everything into peanut butter and you're insane. Those are your options. And it's like, this generalizes all over philosophy. They do this all the time. It's really, really obvious that they do this. And yet they keep doing it. Nobody acknowledges it. Nobody's fixing it. What the hell is going on?
Yeah. And I think, at a certain point, you have that exasperation. And then you ask that question. And then you say, okay, there's got to be something. And that's kind of what is behind kind of the work that I've been doing, where it's like, there's got to be a reason that this happens, why people whiff on this. One of the main reasons, I think, is Mdic, where dead conversations tell no tales, right? Like the straightforward, boring answers, including ones like, that could mean multiple things. So this all hinges on how you want to define it. Period. Shut off the lights. Go home. Right? That is the answer to a lot of these things. There's like a trivial exit, or there's like an ambiguity that you can point out. The end. But the lights are off. Nobody's coming over. There's nothing more to do. Right? And so there's a unselecting feature of the right answers for certain classes of problems, especially these very foibled ones.
Yeah, and how do you end up directing after you cover these foibles? You then say, okay, now let's recap. Let's go back over Newcomb's problem and let's re-examine it in light of these foibles. What do you end up doing there?
So even though some of the papers that I've read are like, oh, you can't make new versions of this thing, I was like, I am going to. I'm going to make a new version of this. And in this version, I'm just going to say that we're going to invent a machine called Newcomax. And Newcomax has code that it runs off of. And it's a decision-making engine, maybe an expert system or a neural network or something like that. But it has intricate code inside, and it takes 10 minutes from start to decision made, and it's either going to do 1 box or 2 box. And next to it is the engineer, and the engineer gives a prediction of what it thinks Newcomax is going to do. You can stipulate engineer 100% knows Newcomax in and out. Maybe he even made Newcomax. In any case, he flips on Newcomax and it starts to do its 10-minute process. Engineer, same setup in terms of like the engineer has either put money under the box or denied money or whatnot. But 5 minutes through the experiment, ask yourself, if you get the money that Newcomax earns for you, what do you hope Newcomax is? So it's not you making the decision, it's this other decision-making engine that's making the decision. And the engineer being a perfect predictor is not implausible at all, because he's an engineer and it's computer code, right? So 5 minutes through, nobody knows what's under the box except for the engineer. What do you hope Newcomax is, a 1 boxer or a 2 boxer? What decision do you hope Newcomax makes? And the universal answer is 1 box. Because you want $1 million, right? If Newcomax is going to choose 2 boxes, then that's what the engineer will have predicted, not retrocausally, just retromodally, because there's a common cause, because the engineer knows the code. And if it's 2 box at the end, it's going to open it up, won't have $1 million under there. You'll get $1,000. That's better than nothing. But you wish it was 1 box, right? What that does is it sets us off on the right foot. It avoids all the discussion about free will and like human determinism and all that kind of stuff. It doesn't make it about you, so you no longer imagine that you could change your mind and all that kind of stuff. No, it's this other thing that's making the decision. All you are is hoping that it does the right thing for you without your hand on the lever. And that makes 1 boxing so clearly the right thing to do, the rational thing to do per getting a lot of money. From there, then, you can tweak the thought experiment as you wish. You can make the engineer not perfect by dialing down his knowledge about the code base, or the processes he takes might be fallible in order to like get the prediction right or whatever. But as you dial that down, you should not feel it go from, oh, now we're a 2 boxer as soon as he's only 99.99999. No. What you do is you put all of the values on a spreadsheet and you plug it into an expected value function, a very easy one. And then you get this lovely gradient that tells you, oh, okay, as long as he's slightly better than a coin flip on prediction, you hope that Newcomax is a 1 boxer, because that's your best expected value. If, on the other hand, the engineer is an anti-predictor and he predicts wrong stuff most often, then you pick 2 box. And then that exposes the whole thing. It's like, oh, you would only pick 2 box if the predictor is actually terrible. Wow, that is an obscured result, right? But now, because we've externalized the chooser, we've disambiguated what is involved in prediction, we've granted a case where things can be deterministic, but just kind of chaotic or unknown, and you get this thing here. And that's it, right? Lights off, go home. That's Newcomb's problem. Until we go back to the original thought experiment, foible by foible. So now you can say, okay, yes, this isn't Newcomb's problem. It's a different problem. And you could say, well, okay, well, then that's not what we're talking about. But if we start here and then slowly add or subtract differences between this and Newcomb's problem, you can see where the mess begins, where the ambiguities start to flourish, where the side tangent conversations about free will start to appear. And I think that's a great exercise. And it may be an exercise that could be applied to some of these other thought experiments that seem so perennial, the fire's raging and inextinguishable.
Yeah, so I really love this approach that you take. And one of the things I worried about if someone reads all this and they get to the end of it is they might go, okay, so you do favor a definitive solution to Newcomb's problem, one boxing. Would you say that that's correct, or would you disagree with that?
I have to disagree with that because I say there are a zillion Newcomb's problems, one for every interpretation of prediction. If, however, we say, hey, are you granting me that we can know the percentage prediction, 100% or 99% or 60%? If you give me that, then I'll give you that spreadsheet and it's a one boxer as long as it's better than a coin flip. Done. If, however, you're saying, oh, when I said he was a perfect predictor, I actually didn't know what I was saying, and it could be anything. We don't know anything about his success rate, his future success rate in terms of this problem here. If you tell me that, I say, I'm out. I don't engage in this thought experiment. Or I don't think that there's a call that you can make, because not knowing anything about the predictor, it's anyone's guess, right? It's like any other expected value thing where you're denying me materially relevant information. It's like, well, I don't know. I guess I'd pick at random or whatnot. Maybe I think if it's 50%, you two box. So I'm going to treat it as 50% and I'll be a two boxer because it's 50%. But notice what happened. You had a bunch of yammering about a predictor, and then we said, actually, it's a coin flip. It's like, okay, what is that? That's got to be some sort of maladaptation or mutation of the problem. So that's where I stand. Like if someone asks me that, like first we got to disambiguate that bit. And then once we do, I'll give you an answer.
Yeah, so that's what I want to end on, because the way I look at a lot of these problems, I often want to say that I'm some type of quietist about the problem, in a certain respect. But often I've had people jump on that and say, no, you can't call yourself a quietist. Quietism is more programmatic and more broad than that. You can't be a quietist about this local little issue. You've got to be a quietist in a more general sense. And what if I don't want to be? Or they might say, well, you actually do have conditional answers, like pending specification. So you're not really a quietist. So, I call myself an anti-realist quietist. And then I've had people say, well, you can't be both. You can't have an answer to the realism question and be a quietist. For me, I would want to say, well, I'm a quietist about this question or about this issue, and I'm not a quietist about this other issue. And people haven't liked that. I don't know how, this is a case where I see these labels as like it's a scarf I could put on if I feel like it. It's a hat I could take on or take off.
That's right.
How do you approach the question of the labels and terminology?
Yeah. So first of all, I think anyone trying to enforce a conceptually absolute meaning of quietism is a loudest. So like there are millions of meanings of quietism. As Wittgenstein said, back to rough ground. What's the quietist attitude? The quietist attitude wants to keep the lights off on stupid stuff. The quietist wants to put out the fire when the fire is dangerous. Okay. Now, if putting out the fire in a broad sense and in a permanent sense means leaving the fire going for now in order to serve this strategy where at the end of the day, these fires no longer start. It's like variable retention harvests to fight wildfires, right? I can selectively start a fire, a controlled one, in order to clear the underbrush so that when the lightning storms happen later in the summer, we won't have a more massive mess. Now, am I a firefighter when I start those fires? Right? That's like this quietism thing. It's like, no, hold on. The quietist attitude is to shut this stuff off in a more permanent fashion, which means we gotta start the conversations. We gotta be loud about certain things, all in service to, at the end of the day, we stop talking about this damn problem. and at least everyone knows how to approach problems of this kind and similar kinds.
Yeah, I like the direction you took that, because I have had people also say, "Oh, if you're a quietist, why are you talking? Why are you talking?" Like that's gotcha.
Yeah.
And it's exactly this. It's like, and I've said, I'm like, look, I'm talking about this so that we can all shut up about it. Because, if you go into a room and you want everyone to be quiet, what do? Do you just go, I have to be quiet to get everyone to be quiet? Doesn't make sense. Yell at everyone, hey, shut up. So you often got to be real loud to get quiet.
Yes. Yes, exactly.
So I like the fire metaphor, but I'll shout at some people too. Maybe I'll do that next time I go into a philosophy class. I'll say, "Shut up! I'm a quietist. Shut up!"
Yeah. Perfect.
That'd probably get people quiet.
That's chef's kiss.
I think we got to wrap it up there. So I love doing these short conversations. These are great. So you'll have to pop back for us to talk about something else. But this is a lot of fun. So thanks again for being here. Link to the blog post is in the description. Thanks for running us through that. So everybody go check out the blog post, subscribe to Stan's Substack, check it out. And yeah, if you got other stuff for me to link to, I'll throw that in there too.
All right. Sounds good.
All right. Thanks again for being here. Take care. See y'all later, everybody. Oh, and yeah, and like the video, subscribe, leave comments, do all that stuff. I'm supposed to say all that like in the video, and I never do. All right, everybody. See you later.